And thank you so much to the Long Island Society for inviting me to come. It's a privilege and an honor to be here, and I have enjoyed already our time together. It's really nice to come and see in a new place to me familiar faces, people that I've worked with on committees, I've seen in meetings, seeing Diane from Lay Leadership Summer School. The times that we've spent together make me feel like I'm coming home, but also give me a sense of this is something new for me, and a chance to learn more from you and share a couple of ideas this morning. I know that your theme this year is inspiration. And when Patricia asked me to speak and say, okay, if you feel like it, if you want to, not necessary, but if you feel like fitting in with the theme, this is what we're looking at is inspiration. And I said, yeah, sure, Mike, whatever. Inspiration, that's easy. I got them all over the place. And then it came time to get ready. And I had to think, well, what exactly am I going to talk about? And what exactly does it mean? And I did what I always do. I went to my old favorite, the dictionary, to see what it is that really I was going to have to do, because I took this in one way, but the dictionary said it's the process of being mentally stimulated to do or feel something. I got that part, especially to do something creative. And that lost me because I just hadn't been thinking in terms of creating and making something new. And of course, when you think about creating, you always think about something that has to do with art or music or even literature or writing. I didn't think about it that way. I thought about inspiration more as a reason to get up in the morning and keep going. This is what inspired me to keep on keeping on, if you will. So if you'll forgive me for bending your frame of inspiration in that direction, I want to talk a little bit about the stimulation, the mental stimulation that keeps me going, that gives me focus and purpose, that pulls me out very often of the doldrums of despair. That's the sort of mental stimulation that I found in ethical culture. Now, I'll talk about that specific stimulus, what does that for me, but first I want to meander a little bit through, consider how I found that stimulus, and maybe a little bit about why I needed to find that inspiration of ethical culture in my life. When we come to ethical culture, unless we were lucky enough to have parents who were ethical culturists, ethical humanists, to bring us up in ethical culture, at some point we found ethical culture and we decided this was for us. When we did that, generally we came probably as adults. We came more or less as a whole person. We had already been formed by the lives that we led BEC, before ethical culture. We would have, I think, grown up with a family that has its own unique connections and patterns of behavior. For me, that's Texas and a lot of Louisiana. That's rural. Both my parents came off of farms. That's the Depression, and it's World War II. And what they both went through during World War II to survive that. There's not really time to talk about my mother's story, but the poor health care in East Texas and the war going on and the lack of, well, in any case, she was handicapped by that for the rest of her life and had struggles going forward. So this was a major effect on their lives and coming forward into mine. We also, when we came to ethical culture, might have been part of a particular religious tradition. Most Americans, in any case, belong to a religious tradition. Many the majority of them right now are Christian, but some religious tradition, some way that reflected probably past generations of our family's community as well, because people very often stay in the same community of belief that they've had for past generations of the family. But when we came to ethical culture, for whatever reason, we probably were ready to leave that tradition. We were going to leave it behind. In my case, I was Southern Baptist all the way. In my family, we were all Baptists, except for that aunt who married into the Church of Christ. She was different in a lot of ways, and she didn't quite fit, but everybody was totally Baptist. And I started, my earliest memories were going to Flowers Landing Baptist Church in Newellton, Louisiana. I got a certificate for attendance, perfect attendance, when I was 5. I was very proud of that. Mother kept it for years. And then on to Harbor Baptist and Second Baptist, and then Woodridge Baptist. And at that point, that was kind of the end of it. And I split from the tradition. We come also with a background. We may have whatever level of education. We might have had some career. We have personal relationships that give us a sense of community, a sense of purpose. And those formed us before we came to ethical culture. And in my case, I was a student at the University of Houston, an English major, headed for a teaching career, public schools, most likely. That lots of teachers in my family, that was something a woman could do. And my family even encouraged me, just in case the marriage didn't work out, you'd have something to fall back on. You never know what's going to happen. Think of that. That's the framework for my career. I did end up going to graduate school. I did the very Texas thing of a teenage marriage at 19. And my husband, the first husband, so he didn't last for about 5 years. That was it. But in any case, he was interested in African studies, and I'm a good wife. I said, of course, I'm going to follow along wherever he goes and participate in African studies, going to study that. And because I was an English major, I sort of thought Anglo-African writers like Colin Turnbull, who wrote Cry the Beloved Country or Too Late to Follow Up, if you've read those, that Anglo-African writers really represented African literature. And so, well, it was Texas, and it was the 60s. And so it took me a while to move forward. But that was the framework. That was also the point when, like, about 31%, according to the Pew Research Institute, 31% of American Christians switch somewhere in their late teens and early 20s. And my life followed that pattern. It was very much set, very much determined by where I grew up and my family and our history together. But something happened, and I think it was Ralph Waldo Emerson, an exposure to that in graduate school. There were some cracks that were beginning to develop in my philosophy and attitude toward the world, but there came that moment. And after Emerson, I just kind of didn't go to the Baptist church anymore. I had other things to do, and I began to live my life differently. And about 30 or 40 years later, I discovered ethical culture. Now, Texas, I never heard of ethical culture before. Ethical culture is kind of hard to find. I found a footnote in Wikipedia and I said, what the heck is this stuff? I was looking for a community. We won't go through all the drama of why I needed a community at that point, but I was really seriously hunting for some place to be. And I did find ethical culture. It was a miracle, truly, to find it at all. But of course, I had to learn about it because, it could have been a cult. and I really wasn't interested in joining a cult. And if you look at some of Adler's work, it's a little bit conservative on some things. It's possible that Felix was a bit of a prude, but I did understand, having read enough 19th century and really 18th and 17th century English literature, that his attitudes that he had toward the education of women, you want to give women a good education so they can be good mothers, really was progressive for his period of time. And so I gave him a little bit of credit for that. I wasn't completely turned off. What got me, though, is learning more about his life and who he was, checking him out, to see the influence from Ralph Waldo Emerson. And I said, okay, fine, it'll be all right. We'll get through this. And so I did what we all do at the beginning. I read that founding address. I've read it several times over the years, and it continues to inspire me. It's the address where he talks about deed before creed, and in somewhere in there, you also, in and around these writings, you hear about bringing out the best. I really love the language. I mean, he does have the most interesting use of language. It's fairly ornate. There isn't a trope or a figure of speech that he hasn't used multiple times somehow or other to try to get his ideas across. But to me, it's beautiful language. And when he says, believe or disbelieve as ye list, I get it. I really like it. And I like that we will respect every honest conviction, that we're not ready to be bashing other people. He goes in that address and he says, the past speaks to us in 1,000 voices. I go, oh, yes, I hear it now. And then he says, the future calls upon us to prepare its way. And that one stopped me. That one really struck me, because there's a word in there that really grabs me and holds me. And that's the word call. I bet you thought I was going to say future, but it's call. My tradition, my background makes me respond to the word call. I hear a call. I know that people are called, or at least I was raised to understand that some of us have callings. Teachers have callings. Don't you know that how are they dealing with this poor child who can't read, or this one who has trouble with numbers, and they work hard to begin to help, to overcome the problems and challenges and hurdles, to bring possibilities into this young life. When you talk about something difficult, something maybe messy, emotional work, people who do that kind of work surely don't do it for the money. Surely they don't do it because they are heroes, and we build statues to teachers and social workers and those kinds of people who do that. So we talk about it in terms of a calling. And in my tradition, when people are called, when they are answering the call, when they are doing what they are called to do, they become then heroic and ennobled. They have then, in my heart, elevated stature. Hearing the call and answering the call is its own reward. In fact, at least that's what we tell teachers, because that's better than, like giving them actual salaries or raising it. So for me, coming to these words in that address, the future calls upon us to prepare its way. I said, yes, I hear you. This is wonderful, because I was so relieved that we didn't actually need a God, a deity, something supernatural to call us. The future could call us, and that was totally fine. That was well within my framework of belief and how I could deal with things. And it was still a call, and I could answer this call, and it would get me out of bed in the morning, keep me going, kind of thing. But then, it gets real sticky when you start looking at something like that, because call is not the only key word in that phrase. And where my background makes me always look at textual explication. I got to look at the sentence and how it's structured and what the key words are in there. I did it certainly back in the days when I was an English major. Later, when I went to East Africa and I was doing research on Swahili proverbs. Proverbs are nice, short sentences. They're just complete in and of themselves. If you want to understand them, you got to know what every word means, how it's put together, and then how it's used and what the secret inside meaning is, and working that kind of way. So that's how I'm bent. It's kind of how I'm structured. So the future calls upon us to prepare its way. So I hear the call and I'm all excited about that. But what does this mean about future? What is that is calling us? If it's not a deity, if it's not supernatural, it's actually not a concrete thing. What is the future? And that's, I think, where the key is here for us in our discussion, to talk about the many possibilities that are there for the future, that if we're going to hear the call, we want to know what the future is that's calling us. How do we, as a matter of fact, define what that future should be? What do we want it to be? How far are we looking into the future? We already plan our future. When we set our calendars for the next day or week or month, what am I going to do tomorrow and how do I get ready for it? That's the kind of planning that's involved in hearing the call of the future and preparing its way. We do it on a daily basis. And we do it on a long-term basis. We started planning a long time ago, I hope, for our retirement, and begin socking things away and setting things up for that. Right now, the AEU is involved in talking about its future. We might talk about the future of the society. We might talk about the future of New York State. I know that Linda Napoli, who can't be here today because of Thanksgiving and family obligations, is actively working on trying to build a coalition to build a better future in New York State with fair banking, which is answering the call, is it not? Making the effort to prepare that way. We might want to talk about the future of our country or the future of our world. Right now, AEU is awfully focused on its own future. We had, at one point earlier this year, someone say that ethical culture is dead, and said it in a very public sort of way. And it was retracted and discussed, but it was alarming nonetheless to hear that kind of statement. And it was alarming enough that the AEU board and many of its lay leaders, as well as some of its clergy leaders, said, you know, maybe we need to talk about this some. Maybe we need to think about, where is ethical culture going? Where is the AEU going? What do we want our future to be in ethical culture? So we talk about, do we want to be bigger? Do we want more societies? Do we want more people involved? How do we want to change the AEU in terms of size? Or do we want it to be more influential? A lot of people are saying, we really wish we had the voice out in the community where people would hear what we had to say, would understand our values. People who share our values would know who we are and where we are and come join us, so that we could also take action together to be more influential in terms of creating a more ethical world. It might be too that our future could be a little more stable. It wouldn't hurt if we had, you know, some more money to do things with. It could also be that maybe we need to invest some more in training our volunteers as well as our clergy leaders. What are the possibilities for this future for AEU? And once we decide what that future is, nobody's agreed on it yet. We're still talking about it. We're in that process of deciding what that future might be. But once we decide that, where's our path? What path will get us there? And here's the thing about the call. If you've got the future and you've got the path, you still have the work of preparing that path. so that the future is part that comes to be. So that's the call. That's what it's saying to us, to look toward the future, to do all of this work that says, where are we now? Where do we want to go? What do we want to be? We have in the AEU 23 societies. Most of them are concentrated in the Northeast. There are a few sort of down the eastern seaboard on toward the south. And then there's just this tiny little dots here and there west of the Mississippi. And here I am, west of the Mississippi. I don't know why there aren't any more ethical culture societies in Texas. Well, it's Texas, so maybe that's an explanation all by itself. But there is also, I mean, we have cities. We have blueberries in this Red Sea here. We have Houston and Dallas and San Antonio. We just somehow they are not visible enough. We're just here in Austin and we're small. You have a much larger attendance today than we can muster in Austin right now. And it's a matter of some concern. Well, some of the societies, we have 23 societies, various sizes. Some of them are big. Our largest society has about 350 members, and our smallest is around 10. That's where we are. Some of the societies have leaders, and some do not. The societies that have clergy leaders often have a meeting house. They have a building where they can gather. And they also contribute the most in terms of members and funds to support the ethical culture movement and the American Ethical Union. The smaller societies are struggling. They're having a hard time. But all of us, no matter whether we're a small society, a new society, an old society, all of us are getting older and grayer. Our clergy leaders are older. We have maybe 4, either trained or in training, under 50. I don't want to say under 40 because I'm not too sure about how old that one is, so I didn't ask age. You don't do that, but most of them we're older. And then we have, when we're looking for the future, well, we have to look at the context that we are. We're in a country that is wildly divided. How do we bridge that divide, or do we need to bridge that divide? Should we be talking to people who disagree with us so thoroughly that it's painful to listen to some of the things they say? Our national population is aging, and we have lingering COVID. The epidemic continues more quietly, perhaps less news coverage going on, but the thinking is that the disabilities caused by long COVID are part of what's making it hard to find workers, that so many people have been disabled by COVID that they're unable to work, at least in the jobs that they used to hold. The climate is a concern. When we talk about the future, a lot of our young people are saying, what future? I don't have a future. The planet is going to burn up. So how do we convince even those folks, our young people, how do we talk about the climate and the need to do our part without also sounding so defeatist that people have no hope and no sense of how do they move forward, that there is a future to imagine? We do have a funny thing going on in the country too. A lot of people are leaving their churches. Pew Research says about 31% every year. That's a big chunk of people leaving churches, but then they're not actually, even though we say they're nuns and they don't belong to another religious group, they're not actually joining anything else. Maybe a bowling group, but how do we get them to come to us, to come join us and the kinds of things that we find valuable and important to do? That's a tough part of it. And then there's in thinking of the future, for me, we're looking at how is the AEU going to change? How can it change to accommodate? The AEU will change whether we want it to or not. Life changes. We as individuals change. It's part of living, that from day to day, we're not the same person today that we were yesterday. So the question is, will the AEU shrink or grow? Will it increase its resources and skills, or what does it need to do? And my sense here is this. Not that I have a magic answer, but this is just how my background and my experience and the way I've come to approach problems leads me to start looking at this, is that we need to know or have a better understanding of who we are and be more assertive about stating who we are to strengthen our sense of identity within the movement, as well as our sense of community. You did a beautiful job of that this morning, talking about what ethical culture is and why we joined together in this meeting. It was a lovely way of approaching a problem that other societies have not yet found, a way to build that cohesiveness and that strength. But when we do build that, we also have to find a way to pull together. Sometimes I see things that I want in the future, and not everybody agrees with me. I need to let that go, don't I? I kind of have to say, okay, let's try it that way. Let's modify, let's adjust, let's compromise, find our ways forward so that we are putting aside the creed of whatever it is that's going on in our brains that says that's the way to do it, and working together with the same deed, that we are pulling together in the same direction. For me, this is just for me, the future is calling me to preserve the past. I very, very much want to see that the past knowledge and beauty of the work that our clergy leaders have done is preserved, that we protect our archives and begin to present more of the writing that's come out over the last 100 and almost 50 years, that we have access to that. So I'm working on a bibliography. I'm working on trying to find out how do we get an online library. These are things that I think it's important for the future, that we have that anchor in the past. It's important for me for the future to promote the possibility of 150 more years. Ethical culture, no, is not dead. Ethical culture may be a little tired. It may need a chance to take a deep breath to start again, but it's going to be here, and it will continue as long as we continue, and as long as those we influence and help will carry it forward. So it's important to me to say, we got another 150 years in us. Let's get to work on that. And I also think that a part of that, and this is a struggle for me, I think we have something to say. I think we have something of value to present to each other, to the community, to our families, to the world. Let's just go there. Why don't we just say we have something really important to share? These seeds of ethical culture that we grow and nurture, that's part of what Adler was talking about. It comes out of that tradition of self-culture and also cultivating, wanting to grow these things. How do we plant more seeds out there? I don't know the answer, but that's the call that I'm hearing from the future. Now, this has been sort of a meander, I wouldn't say ramble, but meander through how I got here and where I find inspiration, because that's where I find that mental stimulation that keeps me going, that will stick me at this keyboard for hours on end, not just playing games or reading books, but researching, writing, making sure that we find some way to do these kinds of things. That inspires me. And my question to you is, do you hear a call from the future? And if you are, what is it you're being called to do? And what are you going to do about it? Thank you.